Welcome to the third plenary session. Today we are going to discuss the relation between the Nordics and Russia. Is détente and common security possible? And we have two speakers. I think they were already introduced in our first plenary this morning. It's Ingeborg Breines, who is a peace educator and long-time diplomat, been director in UNESCO, and also very active in peace movement. She has been president in International Peace Bureau for 2 periods. And after that, she has been very active in the Norwegian peace organizations and movement.
She's the leader of Norway.
And she is the leader of WILF Norway, yes. Do we need to add more? And Reiner Braun is a former director of International Peace Bureau. He's a historian from Germany. And president as well. And now he is trying to be a bit more, a little bit less organizational, more activist, and active still in the board of International Peace Bureau, and also working in active and kind of coordinator of a working group in International Peace Bureau to discuss how to make some steps towards détente towards Russia. So we will hear more from both of them. We have 1.5 hours. We try to have only half an hour introduction from each. And then we have a discussion afterwards. I will not open for questions after the first speaker because it is always impossible to distinguish between questions and comments and discussion. Have I found out in my research during this? So 30 minutes, and then 30 minutes for all of you. Okay, please, Ingeborg.
Yes, thank you. Very brief, but I think when we are here, we have to start with a Gastung quote, and my quote today is, security does not lead to peace, but peace leads to security. I thought I would share with you that as I grow older and hopefully gain a little more insight as I have been struggling to find out how to build a culture of peace or cultures of peace and nonviolence for many years, I have become even more deeply convinced that the war logic, the pervasive military systems, the insistence on the need for deterrence, the thinking that weapons are the way to peace, and that we need to protect ourselves from the others that might come and take us anytime, is the biggest bluff ever from patriarchy. Yeah, I thought I would get some reactions. Because humankind need each other, need natural diversity, need good educational health and systems and decent work possibilities, law and order, and when need be, also psychiatry. None of this we get through a military system. So my talk will be mainly on the importance of neutrality. We have 2 Nordic countries that have just left their neutrality. We should all work towards neutrality again. And we should link up with the non-aligned countries and insist that there are no war alliance that is for the good of humanity. So this is contrary to the official policies in the Nordic countries that more and more define Russia as our enemy. We train on war. We have even, Norway has even participated now 2 years in training on nuclear war with Russia from our F-35 Joint Strike Fighters. I think actually that if Russia, like the Atlantis, vanished in the ocean tomorrow, it would take the military, industrial, media, academic complex no more than a few days to find and define an other enemy to fear. And we have to attack the issue from that angle, because building enemy images as we do now is totally hampering normal cooperation between people. And the fact that we are behaving with such double standards, raising an iron curtain against Russia, whilst we say we are concerned as to what is happening in Gaza, Palestine, West Bank, and that we even applaud, but not so loudly, but still the US war on Iran now. So the double standards with which we confront Russia and Israel, US on the other side, is totally unacceptable. So we have been talking about Russia now over some sessions, and when we prepared for this conference, many of us wanted to have real Russian culture with us here today. It's not that obvious. But imagine if we had somebody to play Russian music or sing Russian romances to us. Maybe it would open our hearts a little more to the importance of understanding the others through their culture. Now we have blocked ourselves from cooperation in the field of culture, in the field of science, in the fields of sports. And of course, Norway is winning anything in the sports, skiing, etc., when we don't have Russian. Yeah, football is another thing, has nothing to do with the relation to Russia, as far as I can understand. But the fact that we are closing our hearts and minds from our neighbor is not a good sign, civilizational sign. And in 2018, Birgitte Grimstad, Trine Eklund, and I organized a Nordic peace and cultural trip to Russia. We went to Moscow, we went to St. Petersburg, and we were sailing on the rivers that the Nordic Vikings have been sailing previously. And we met Russian peace activists, environmentalists, thinkers, And they said, we thought that the Nordic peace movement was dead. We haven't heard from you. And we had been thinking that perhaps the Russian peace movement had been dead. Birgitte Grimstad, as the very professional singer that she is, and I know that she would have loved to be with us here today, insisted that we needed to have very professional artists with us on this trip. So we had, and the exchange between the Nordic artists, actually they were only Norwegian artists, and the Russian artists were very moving. I don't know if I, as a Norwegian, felt it particularly strong, but I felt that the warmth that came from the Russian people with whom we spoke was very strongly directed towards Norway. And the fact that we have some 26 kilometers border, nothing like what the Finnish had, but at the time it was the only NATO border with Russia, at least in the north. It was the only. And they kind of romanticized the fact that we had a well-functioning democracy in Norway. And they were dreaming of having a well-functioning democracy at home. The border in Finnmark at the time was the border in the world where there was the biggest difference between the economy on the one side of the border and the other side of the border. And they, of course, wanted a better economy at home. One of the things that were that I remember in particular is that when we were in St. Petersburg, we met at the Peace Council in St. Petersburg, and there was a grown-up Russian scientist who said that the NATO submarines hiding in the depths of the Norwegian fjords were the biggest threat to Russian security. It has stayed with me afterwards. They also expressed deep takknemlighet that Nansen had provided so much poverty assistance and help with the Nansen passports, and that they would never forget. They also strongly underlined that they didn't want any war, having lost 27 million people during the last World War. So these were impressions taken back, and when we were back in Oslo, both WILP Norway and the Norwegian Peace Alliance supported very much the outcome that we had from this cultural and peace trip, underlining the need for dialogue with Russia. So two big conferences, Nordic-Russian conferences, were organized in Oslo. The last one was during the the pandemic, which meant that the Russian colleagues only could participate per screen, because the Russian vaccine was not accepted in Norway. We planned for a trip back to Russia in the north when Russia was governing the Arctic Council, and we wanted to go to the place outside Murmansk to see if we could strengthen relations. And from time to time, at least in WILP, we talk about the possibility, how can we make a new trip to Russia? And today, Liz very strongly said that after having listened to the discussions that we had, let us organize a bigger conference on Russia that might be a stepping stone to new travels to Russia. I will not say much more before I give the floor further to Reiner, except underline, which was already stated to a certain degree from CIPRI, but imagine that the almost $2.9 trillion that the world is spending on the military per year is divided in the way that NATO spends 55% of this, Russia 8.8, and China 12. Please explain to me why we have to militarize more in order to stand up against this threat. It is beyond me. And if these figures are too big to really grasp, let us make the comparison with the UN. The UN regular yearly budget is less than 1/600 times of the military budget. If we want the UN to be the body that can help us avoid, prevent war, that insists that war no more, that has the UN Charter to guide us when we have difficulties. The disproportion here is blatant. And if we need even more ways of comparison, 8 days of the world military budget is enough to give free quality education to every boy and every girl in the world. To me, that would be an investment in the development of the individual, in the development of the countries, and in peace. So we have to follow the money and confront the figures that are here and say this is unacceptable. Reiner, Laura, and I were in Moscow in 2015, marking the 40th anniversary of the Helsinki Agreement Act. And we worked at the State University of Moscow and with the cooperation of the Rosa Luxemburg Foundation. And I think, Laura, that it is Reiner that we first and foremost could thank for the possibility of this meeting. So, Reiner, please.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ingeborg. And you know, my words will also be a little bit impression and facts. I was visiting Moscow end of April, beginning of May for 10 days in a small group, invited by the European Institute of the Academy of Sciences, where we had a one-day conference about common security. And we had a lot of meetings there in different places. I will a little bit come back to this later. You know, let me say very clear, I am, and this is partly an accusation, I am a Putin understander. Because I believe when you are not understand the other, you cannot criticize the others. So I'm trying to understand the Russian politics, and I'm trying to find common ways to peace with Russia. And let me say this in the beginning as a German citizen. We should never forget what we have done to the Soviet Union. We killed 27 million Russians. More than half of them were civilians. We destroyed the country from the border of Germany over Poland till to Moscow. And when the troops were going back, we burned and destroyed everything. There was nothing any longer. We killed 5 million soldiers which were in German concentration camps. And after the war, we were again accepted by the Soviet Union people. And they tried to develop friendly relations to us. I was the first time in Moscow in 1976, 1 year after Helsinki, with the first student train on the basis of the Helsinki Agreement. And I was surprised how friendly the Russians were to us. They are friendly to us till today. But my impression, and maybe it's a wrong impression, but my impression is that now there starts to begin a change in this behavior. Some of my friends were saying, are you coming to us again the third times with the military? And this is a deeper feeling in the Russian society. And when I'm seeing that we are buying first use weapons, conventional and all nuclear, then I can imagine what the Russian people are feeling. And that on the background, that the German unification would be impossible without the Soviet Union. Gorbachev gave us the second half of Germany. And he put back all his troops for quite nothing. What are 5 billion for making Germany Russian troops free? And we forgot this. And we are again, and this, I think there is no difference between your country and my country, maybe in the wording, fundamentally aggressive against Russia, and we are really believing that the Russian tank again is in our garden. And that creates an atmosphere of hate, violence, and destroy the feeling that we have common interests. And to answer the big question, is common security possible? Quite in the beginning, there is no alternative to common security. The alternative is the Third World War, and no one in Europe will survive in a Third World War, because it will be even quicker than we expected a nuclear war. And that means for Europe the end. So there is no alternative for common relations, common security, friendly relations, cooperation, and dialogue with the biggest country of the world. We cannot change the geography. We have to accept them, and we have to work with them. So it is an absolute need that we are coming back to cooperative relations. These relations, and I will say this also very clear, are for me the background that we can criticize and discuss about undemocratic, authoritarian behaviors in Russia. On the top of tanks, on the top of confrontation, there's never a discussion about mistakes, faults, undemocratic practices in other countries. Both will never accept this. So when you really want to have an exchange for a better understanding of each other, for better conditions of living, you need cooperative relations, dialogue, and communication. And the question is, and this is one of the main questions, can we trust Putin? That is the question always is raised every day and every night in our media. My answer is vice versa. What should Putin think about us? When we are looking to the history of the last 30 years, there was a Charter of Paris, and the Charter was not signed. The first document in NATO was developed then, and we knew this now from interviews of the General Secretary of NATO at that time, Werner, who was a German, that at the same time, NATO developed the first plans to go to the East. 1991, 1992. And this is totally the opposite what we have signed in the Charter of Paris. Dialogue, cooperation, disarmament, no troops along the borders of each other. And this was the start point. What should Putin think about it? He signed, and at the same time, confrontation issues start. And the NATO enlargement to the east over the years, first under this, how do you call him? I cannot call him President, Yeltsin. Under Yeltsin shows, because Russia was too weak, and the winner of the Cold War believed that he can do everything, was marching to the east. And then there is this argument, oh, the country, Estonia, and want this. They also signed the Charter of Paris. But the US was immediately going to them and tell them, you need to come to NATO. We need you. It was not only coming from these countries with their history, but it was also coming from the pressure from the United States. So Putin can also say, what is this? And the enlargement of NATO, including Ukraine. And never forget what was written in the constitution of Ukraine. Neutral country. And when was, for me, the beginning of the big time of confrontation? It was not 2014. It was 2008. When, under the pressure of Bush, NATO decided in general that Ukraine should become a member of NATO. There was discussed by Merkel and the French president some exclusion, some long-term strategy, but it was, the decision was that Ukraine should join NATO. And what was this? This was what Brzezinski has written in his paper. You need Ukraine to weaken Russia. Broke out Ukraine of friendly relation to Russia, and you will dominate and make Russia weak. And is it a surprise that at the same time a guy like Obama was saying Russia is a regional power? What is this for a wording against the biggest country in the world? So that is the background when we are discussing who can trust whom. And then have we forgotten that we have the Minsk Agreement? And in the Minsk Agreement was written a lot of things. And later, after she left the Chancellor office, our Chancellor Merkel was speaking in the newspaper Die Zeit. Oh, we made the agreement that Ukraine has time to rearm and to prepare the next war. What is this? There's an agreement where they negotiate with Putin not to make peace for Ukraine, not to develop a Ukrainian society in a new way, much more neutral, much more decentralized, with a new constitution for the East, with more freedom for the East of Ukraine. No! They made the agreement that Ukraine find the time for preparing the next war. So that is the background, I ask the question, who can trust whom? You know, the Russian aggression against Ukraine is a war, and it's an aggression. No doubt about that. But the aggression has a background and has a story behind. And we should never forget this story when we are discussing about our relations and our behavior to Russia. And it is so easy to forget everything and only to speak about the Russian aggression. But only to speak a part about the whole story is also to develop a lie. And that is what we are doing now. And the second point, then it comes the argument, oh, the Russian army is so strong and. But who has broken all the arms control agreements? Who has ended them? Who was ending the ABM treaty? I think the name was Bush. Who was ending the INF treaty? The most important and maybe the only really disarmament agreement in the world, the United States. Who finalized open skies? Who finalized the CFE, the conventional agreement in Europe? It was always in the beginning the United States of America and NATO. And then we are surprised that Putin is developing his army. What should he do? Should he wait till we are coming? But not friendly. So these are points you always forget when we are discussing, or not we, the media and the political propaganda forget when we are discussing Russia. So these accusments are also a part of the so very brutal double moral of the Western countries. And, you know, Ingeborg mentioned it, and I will not borrow you with too many facts. But, you know, the relations between NATO and Russia, the military relations, is in the minimum 3-1, very often 7-1. When you are looking to the troops, to the tanks, to the artillery, to the airplanes, whatever you want to look. And even when you escape the United States from the NATO, and when you only look to the European Union countries in relation to Russia, they spend more money for military purposes than Russia. And, frankly speaking, these European armies are much more modern than the Russian army still is, even when they have some hyperdronic flight drones and flights now. The normal standard of the Russian army is much behind the standard of the Western army. So it is also under these conditions, you know, Clausewitz was saying when you want to attack a country, you need in the minimum 3 times, better 5 times stronger than the country which you want to attack. So NATO is 3 to 5 times stronger than Russia, and Russia should attack us? They must be totally, I don't know the word, blind, whatever. Yeah? So this is a propaganda story for the own armament race, for militarizing against Russia and for making Russia so weak, or only to use Russia for our fossil resources. That is the old game of the Western countries, and that is what they are preparing. So all these figures, you know, I can tell you a lot of them, but I will not do it. I would like to answer to 2 or 3 points which are always coming as accusation to when we are discussing about Russia. The first is Russia invaded Georgia. There was a European Union Commission which were making a report about the war in Georgia. And what was the result? They wrote, it was the Georgian leadership which sent troops to kick out the Russians and to conquer the so-called independent part, Südossetien and Abkhazien. It's a report of the European Union. So not Russia was attacking someone. Russian troops, which were peace troops under the demand of the United Nations, were attacked. They changed the story in our propaganda. Totally. So, and you can take many of these activities where they're accusing Russia, and when you're really analyzing them or try to understand them, you are coming to the opposite of the results which they are talking to you. Now there comes this very important question. One more I will tell you, and this is one of the biggest accusement. Putin wants to re-establish the Soviet Union. You can hear this day and night. And then they quote a sentence from Putin from one of his speeches in Vaidar, I think it was 2012 or 2013. But they're only calling the half of the sentence. The quote of Putin is, "Those who do not regret the end of the Soviet Union have no heart." That is what they officially quote, and then they follow, he will re-establish it. But there's a second half of the sentence. "Those who wish to restore it have no mind." That is the second half of his speech to this question. You know, this is only to show how the Western propaganda, the propaganda who wants to create or who is creating the enemy picture of Russia, is doing it. And all this is only an argument for cooperation. This is not an argument for supporting everything what Putin is doing. Some of his historical narratives are very nationalistic and I think unacceptable when you really know the history. The authoritarian behavior of the Russian regime is definitely not democratic in our Western sense, even when you have always to see the historical development of democracy and not democracy in Russia. The persecution they are doing, some of you know, like me, Kagalitsky, I had really friendly relation about many years to him, is never acceptable. The neoliberalism in the country of Russia and the capitalistic system there, you can question it, and you should. And also the oligarchic system in many parts of the industry and the resources is a monopolistic system we have in our country too. But it is not what we want. So critics Russia, yes, but on the basic of cooperation and dialogue. And this is my last part. You know, the only way, and this is historically proved, to come to relations which are in favor of both sides are the relations of common security. And as a German, I can say we have a lot of experience with this. After the period of Willy Brandt and all the years, we had really friendly, personal relations to Russia. We had every year in the years, in the beginning of the 2000s, we have 12,000 German delegations and organizations going to Russia. Had very friendly relations to Russians, and the same vice versa. We had 7,000 German industrial companies working in Russia, and in addition, they made quite a good profit. We helped Russia with about 25 billion private money in their huge economic and social crisis under Yeltsin. And the German industry could become world champion because of the cheap energy coming from Russia. And I can make the list much longer. We had relations in sports club. We had relations between trade unions and. And for both sides, it was a very successful, peaceful time. And of someone who was present, Gorbachev and his policy changed the minds of the Germans. You know, I was staying in the big Hösch factory with 9,000 workers when Gorbachev was speaking in the factory. And when you were looking in the faces of these workers, you could see that they lost what they have for 20, 30 years in mind, that Russia was an enemy, or in the minimum doubtful. they see that there was a new behavior, new relations are possible. And this is what we destroyed by our behavior of the last 15 years, and where we have to come back. That is why I'm saying common security. The primitive and easy idea of common security is, you know, no one can be friendly alone. You can only be friendly together. Yeah? And so we need to be friendly. Friendly don't mean avoid conflicts. Like you have conflicts in the family and between friends. But friendly means you have to find conflict measures which solve the problem on a peaceful way. And this, I think, is for me the background. We have to come back to the politics of common security. And I will say it, and I will deepen it tomorrow in the workshop. For that we need now, in this deepest crisis, I will say after 45. We have the most critical situation after 45. And I know a little bit about what I'm speaking. I was a child, I recognize the situation in the Cuban crisis 1962. How was the atmosphere in the family? We had at that time for the first time a TV. And normally the TV was always out because of us. But at that time it was running the whole day and night. And we had fear in the family. But now, for me, the situation is much more worse than it was 1962. Because of this behavior of our politicians, which lost their heads of thinking. And this creates a huge, huge danger of a provocation, of a misunderstanding, of something immediately can escalate. So we need to come back to common security. And what we need now, and this is a discussion and a point for all of us, because no one has a real answer to this. We need entrance doors, first steps to come again to these politics of common security, which open the doors for a new way to common security. And the first steps are the most difficult steps. You know, in the first period of common security, it starts, today you will laugh about it, it starts in 1963 for 10 days that the West Berlin people was allowed with a piece of paper to go to East Berlin. It was the first step after totally silence after 61. And then it developed step by step. And now we have to think again about these first steps. And I will tell you, I will give you 2 points which I have in mind next to many others. First of all is maybe we need again something which was called in 1976 the so-called Hamel report. Hamel was at that time the foreign minister of Belgium, and he got the job to develop a report for NATO. And this was a report which combined deterrence, which means armament, and détente, and tried to find relation between both, but opened the door for détente. And this report was accepted in NATO in 1967, and this gave Willy Brandt and others a possibility to develop the East politics, backed up by NATO. Otherwise, Willy Brandt has never done it, because he was also always in favor of NATO. So, but this opened the door. And maybe now, under these difficult conditions, we need again a Hamel report. Maybe it is called Stoltenberg report.
No.
Combined. Good, no way. Okay, you can choose the name. Which always combine, which says, okay, we will continue being strong military, have military power, and even continue the armament race. But on the other side, we open the door for first discussion, negotiation, contacts again to Russia. Détente and deterrence, maybe it then can shift more and more to détente. That is maybe one possibility to go to take these politicians, which are now always crying enemy, 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 to be a little bit more flexible. You know, I know that is not really peace work, because we never accept deterrence. But maybe when we discuss it strategically, it could be a step in the right direction. And the second is, for me, and this is even more important, is that we have to develop again relations to Russia, to Russian people, to Russian society, to Russian organizations, going there even when it is difficult, invite them when it is possible, having Zoom meetings when there's no alternative to this, but be in contact with the Russians. That is for me a key point. And I have a new argument why it is so important. After the trip, and on the trip I learned that there is an intensive discussion in the Russian foreign politics elite. And this discussion is very easy. It says, okay, these Europeans, these aggressive, stupid Europeans, and this is nothing when you are looking to the world map. It is only the rest of Asia to the west. Why should we take care of them? Let's only go to Asia and develop our contacts to Asia. There was a quite famous scientist at one of the meetings who said, you know, I was invited in Austria. And in Austria, I feel like a prisoner. I was always observed, controlled. They were unpolite to me, and. Afterwards, I was going to India and China. It was respectful, accepted, dialogue, open discussion. And then he said, why we should take care of the small rest of Europe, which is nothing else than the western part of Asia. Let's go to the other side. And I think this is really dangerous because we have a common history, we have common positive experience, we have to work together, we could be deep economic change, we need ecological cooperation, we need a cooperation on science and in many other questions. The Arctic question will never be solved. The Baltic Sea will never be a Baltic Free Sea without the cooperation with Russia. So, but this is a feeling in bigger part of the Russian society. And to overcome this, we have to develop context. We have to go to them. We have to discuss with them. We have to speak with them. So my second and my last point is, please help us to develop new relations and new contexts, new cooperation with Russia as a people's diplomacy from the ground, and try to convince our politicians or force them by our actions that we can have first steps in a new direction of common security. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Reiner and Ingeborg, for allowing us and preparing us for a very interesting discussion now. We have half an hour, so we start. Pardon? Yes, we open the doors, please, on both sides, before some of us are fainting. Yeah, that's fine. Okay. Hands up. I think you were the first one. Please, just say your name.
My name is Einar. I came from Stavanger. I have a question for Ingeborg, and I hope I can take it in my own language, because I'm very difficult to think in English. Du snakket veldig flott og veldig klokt om det å ha kontakt med Russland og organisasjoner og personer der for å utveksle erfaringer og for å få forståelse som et middel til å løse konflikter. Men nå er det jo sånn at jeg kjenner folk som reiser til Russland og har kontakt på det nivået der. Og det er folk som er i Russland akkurat nå på en sånn kontaktreise, nemlig en organisasjon som heter Bike for Peace, med fredsaktivisten Tore Nærland i spissen. Men det som skjer, det er jo det at så vidt jeg forstår, så har EU utarbeidet en egen sanksjonsliste over russiske personer som man ikke skal ha kontakt med. Og det gjør jo forholdet til Russland enda vanskeligere enn det er på det statlige nivået. For det er jo personer på lokalplan vi må ha kontakt med som fredsbevegelse. Og det som da skjer er at etter du har vært i Russland og kommet tilbake igjen, så blir du ikke dyrket som en helt eller en som prøver å åpne murer, men du blir sett på som en kriminell. Fordi at du har hatt sannsynligvis kontakt med en eller annen person som er sanksjonert. Og da får du plutselig politiets sikkerhetstjeneste på tråden, og de kaller det da dialogsamtale. Det er jo et nymotens ord, der de skal vite hva slags agenda du hadde for å reise til Russland, og hva slags agenda motparten hadde. Var du der for å fremme Putins budskap? Hvem betalte reisa di? Har du fått penger fra russiske kontakter for å finansiere reisa til Russland, etc., etc. Og jeg føler jo det at dette her er noe som vi må sette på dagsordenen ganske fort, akkurat den måten folk som har kontakt med russere blir behandlet på. For det er ikke kriminelle. Det er idealister som gjør denne jobben her, og det er sånn det må fortsette i fremtiden også. Takk.
Please, we cannot take so long time. There are 10 people who have raised their hands, and these two in our excellent panel have time to answer. And we have this, we have a short break and so on, and then workshops, and then a cafe table dialogue. So we have to keep time. Please be short. Aslak.
Thank you. Aslak Storaker, I'm also a board member of the International Peace Bureau. Just to mention shortly that I put some pamphlets from the IPB outside, so if someone wants to follow the IPB's work or join as an organizational member or individual member, please take some pamphlets. But the question, I'm currently reading the Olof Palme's original report on common security. And what seems to me as fundamental for the ideas there is this, that there's a balance of forces. But in today, as Sipri showed us earlier, the balance of forces is not, it's not an equilibrium. It's very clearly in the West has an overwhelming advantage. So how does that challenge the work for common security?
My name is...
Einar, please don't take too many questions at a time.
I take 4.
Oh, it's already too much.
2 for you and 2 for me. Take notes. Please take notes.
My name is Peter Magnus on the Bergen branch of the anti-war initiative. And I'll go straight to the question. It's a hard question. So if you have managed to establish a table of negotiations where there are 4 presidents, and they will all be happy at the end of the negotiations. There's Putin there, there's Zelensky, there's Macron. He fought his way. He had to be the European representative, and there's Trump. And they're all happy, and the problem is solved, the war is over after that negotiations. What are the main points in that negotiation? That's a hard one for you.
Thank you for the panelists giving us a backdrop for our exchange of experience, because that's as important as the one-way sharing. I want to share something that happened 2 months ago. I'm an architect with Sondov, and we were approached by one of those who followed Bike for Peace to Moscow. And he asked if we could look at designing a Norwegian-Russian friendship house in Storskog, exactly on the border. I think it's a good idea. It may sound naive, but I think you have to have a vision to have a way to work too. So if somebody has some ideas for it, approach me. It's a beautiful project that we will try to discuss more.
Thank you. They don't have to answer that. Then you have 3 questions. You don't need need to answer all of them.
No,
I can't answer the first one because I don't understand.
no. Educator. It is a huge problem, and it's not only a problem if you go to Russia or if you talk with Russians. Even protesting against this black and white thinking that they, the others, are the bad guys and we are the clean and white and great guys. If we question our own Western role in this context, it's enough to be labeled Putinist or not being patriotic or whatever labels you want to put on people. And how to avoid it, I don't know, except that if you are confident enough in yourself, you have done nothing that is of harm to your country. On the contrary, you think that dialogue is the best for Norway, for Russia, for Ukraine, for whoever, then you don't get fearful when they bang at your door and said, what are you thinking, what are you doing? But of course it might be more nasty than that. It might be prisons, we haven't seen that, but cancellations we have seen. And I guess we have to be prepared for that, and it is easier to be prepared for cancellations or labeling if you are convinced that you are on the right side of history. This question as for how to make 4 presidents happy, I will leave to Reiner, but we could try to make sure that they reflect on whether they would like to see their children or grandchildren just vanish into the air through some nuclear explosion, or whether they would find it better to take care of the world and make it better for the coming generations. Reiner.
Thanks. I start with the easier question. You know, disarmament will be, in the new way of a security and more cooperative relations, one of the last things which will happen. My wish is that we start with some arms control agreements. And the most important arms control agreement would be a New START agreement, which stopped the nuclear modernization and which reduced the nuclear weapons. Because there is really, for what we need 13,000 nuclear weapons on both sides, when even 1,000 on both sides would destroy the planet totally. So we could reduce them and save money, a lot of money. So this could be a start point for an arms control and disarmament process. And the next, we definitely need positive results of the international negotiations about an AI agreement for banning AI from being weaponized or being even more a part of the weaponized system. So that could be the next steps. And we have these negotiations, but they are not coming to the end. We also need a deeper discussion about drones agreements. So there could be definitely new steps, and we keep a little bit the conventional imbalance out of the discussion. I think we need a deep trust on both sides before we can start discussing about conventional disarmament. So that is some thoughts about it. So let's start not with the most difficult steps. Let's start with the much more easier steps where the overlap of interest is much bigger than in the conventional disarmament. That would be some figures of my side. So the provocative question of the 4 political leaders. The first part of my answer is very easy. Do the four have the will, the political will, to come to a result? When all four have the political will to come to a result, they will come to a result. But in the past, I was never sure if all participants at the table had the same political will of finding a peaceful solution. Look to Minsk. And when I say, okay, every four, by the pressure of at home, by the social situation of their countries, by the belief of the people, maybe by the 100,000 of killed young men and women, wants to come to results, I think the results could be in the following direction. First of all, Ukraine will be an independent state. Second, Ukraine will be a neutral state. Third, about the new borders, there will be people's vote in the different parts which are controversial, and the people will decide to whom they want to go, Ukraine or Russia. Fourth, there will be neutral troops, UN troops, securing the border and solving conflicts. Fifth, these negotiations will include the discussion about a new security order, because only peace between, or so-called peace between Russia and Ukraine will be definitely not enough. When these points in this direction will be the background, then we can go for a better way. And all of these points are mentioned by all of these four. We have only to put them together in a correct, understandable, agreeable way for every one of these participants.
Okay, thank you. The two things, everybody now will be allowed to speak, and you will have share the few minutes left. Okay, so please take down all the questions and maybe divide the questions between you, because I don't think you disagree too much on things. And then please also say your name, because this is filmed and will be sent afterwards, so it will be easier if you say your name, perhaps also organization. Laura?
Laura from Finnish Peace Union. I think Peace Union at least is really much in favor of the common security idea and working for that. Then Reiner knows that I'm a little bit less understandable of Putin's politics than he is, so that by that. But what we have been thinking in peace organizations in Finland about making more contacts and having the relations with Russians has been on supporting the peace activists, the consensus objectors, the opposition people, trying to have contact. So a little bit the opposite problem than being accused to be Putinist, but by our Finnish friends that has also been, but also somehow to keep the security of those with whom we are in contact with, so that they don't fly out from the window very soon. So because there is coming people to our countries from Russia, wanting to have support as consensus objectors, to have political asylum. So please, that would be something also to try to keep contact with those Russians coming to Europe.
I'm thinking about what Reiner said about... Sorry, my name is Liz Skanke. I'm from Wilf, Norway. I was thinking about what you're saying about starting trust building and contact with the small steps, not necessarily with the most complex themes. And I'm just imagining it would be quite interesting to try a study tour to get to know Russian culture. Books, literature, music, more about paintings, weaving, even folk dance. That might be possible, and it might be a very small first step, starting to know some people. We could use the opportunity, of course, also to take contact with persons we know, like Oleg Bodrov, while we're there. But then it would have a very legitimate and quite honest cultural perspective. It's a little bit the same thing you'd had during your first trip, Ingeborg, but I think that would be an easy entry point And it would be quite serious and legitimate.
Maybe sports also? Could we?
Definitely,
Football. Okay, so now I take the rest. I think Gro, Karen. Have I ignored?
My name is Karen Helvig Petersen, and I'll say something a little bit different, namely that there are also economic interests in all of this. One could even say imperialist competition, that when the movement, I mean the warlike movement started in Ukraine, the West was invading economically and investing and giving an enormous amount of aid, more or less taking over land by surreptitious means, because land is not privatized yet, but somehow they managed. So the enormous wheat and sunflower production could go on other terms than usual. And so these interests, of course, also have aggrieved the Russians, who at the same time had all these mining interests that were shared with Ukraine, coal with the Russians, steel more with the Ukrainians. So I think we have to analyze that also. If now Russians are against this Western takeover, let's put it that way, then on the other hand, also they have been against the German takeover in Russia itself. I mean, this is also a form of capitalist invasion that took place in Russia after '91. And so it's a very nuanced picture in that respect. And I do not doubt that there are Western interests in Russia, in Ukraine, that are also those that are being defended. So I don't disagree with all these other things that are being said, but I mean, we have to take these things into account. Thank you.
Det Gro Staddes fra Wilf Norway. Kan jeg snakke norsk, for jeg tenker, ja. Jeg synes denne konferansen, Common Security, skal arrangeres, og at russere skal inviteres, og at det Nordisk fredsallianse som skal stå bak, og at vi nå begynner å ta oss tid til å diskutere hvordan vi praktisk skal få gjennomført en sånn konferanse. Takk.
Ja, Jonny Verp, Foreningen Norden. Jeg vil peke på muligheter til døråpning og på det første områder for samhandling. Da det Foreningen Ny Musikk og jazzverdenen har allerede etablert det på det internasjonale samarbeidet allerede. Jeg vet ikke, men det ville være lett tilgjengelig og på et gunstig punkt for start.
Okay. Have I ignored anybody on this side? Oh. Okay, you have to wait. No. I come back to you too. I think. Yeah, here. Are there any more here?
Eva fra partiet Fred og Rettferdighet og Besteforeldre Klimaaksjon. Jeg har flere tanker. For eksempel før så var det en fredsmarsj i Russland med mange nordmenn som deltok og skandinaver med samarbeid med russere. Det en idé. Vi hadde mellom skoler at norske skoler tar kontakt med russiske skoler og har utveksling. Det i det partiet Fred og Rettferdighet så har de startet med en forum for russere og ukrainere, en dialogforum. Det en annen idé. Og så det med jeg vet ikke hvordan, men aksjeeiere har makt over banker. Og der det også legger press på våpenindustri og økonomiske interesser som ligger bak alt dette her, egentlig.
Det Sindre igjen her.
Yeah, I'm going to try to be as short as possible. Just 3 points. Firstly, you mentioned that there were 27 Russians killed during the Second World War. And I think it's important to mention that obviously they were Soviet citizens. So many of them were also Ukrainians. They were from Kazakhstan and so forth. And I think that is an important point because now the Russian side as well as the Norwegian side and everybody involved are trying to instrumentalize the history in a way that legitimizes their policies and also demonizes the other side, which also has been a case in Norway, right? The discussion about whether or not we should remove the memorandums for the fallen Soviet soldiers here and change the name to like Foreign soldiers or Ukrainian soldiers, which then get a lot of attention in Russia. And I also, to the second point, I do agree that we also have to address the economic interests that are at stake, because I think Russia do not purely act reactively. They have also sought actively to establish sort of a Euro-Asian economic union, the productions line from the Soviet Union, putting pressure on Belarus, on Ukraine and so forth, which then leads to my final point, and I think that this is important, and I think also should be sort of a reason for people-to-people movement, and that is to understand that like the working people have common interests against these wars and this sort of inter-imperialist conflict. And I think that is also why we should. Okay,
Thank you. This one here.
Maybe a little bit too impulsive. I'm from Kongsberg, Fredslaget. I hate to speak loud now, so I have 200 impulse. But one thing I was thinking about, we forget that we have a big results in the Lapland. And that's also common for people. You have Norway, Sweden, Finland, and Russia. And also Norway have a lot about to say sorry to the Samene. That's the thought. I think that's a big result. And in Norway, we've seen that it's okay to say, I'm samisk. Same, Lapland. So maybe we have to fight up and help the urbefolkning also. And that includes also Russia.
Who was it? It's you. You're the last one. Okay. All right.
Yeah, my name is Halvard Birkeland. I think the point was mentioned here about people falling out of windows in Russia is really important. And as far as I remember, one of the important points in the Stockholm, what's it called, the Helsinki Agreement was the freedom to organize, which resulted in Eastern Europe, which resulted in Charter 77 and such things. So this would be, I think, would be an important part of what the peace movement would demand. But also so in Western Europe, where, as I hear, German journalists interviewing resistance groups in Middle East have been sanctioned economically, so they can't use banks and anything, with the explanation that the only part which could benefit from this is Russia. So there is also a strong disciplinary thing going on in the West.
Okay, I'm sorry if I have to leave behind some late hands up behind, so you have 5 minutes to share, please.
I think I will just applaud the many suggestions for concretizing the I think the conviction that we have that we need to establish dialogue with Russia. So if there is one of these many suggestions that I would highlight, it would be the conscientious objectors that we need to take care of. And as far as I understand, we are not doing that properly in the Nordic countries. If we do in Finland, Laura, please explain to us afterwards so that we can learn more. So I look forward to more cooperation with Russia under the heading, perhaps, that we had last time, neighbors as friends, not enemies. Thank you.
Let me first say, I think when we are discussing about Russia, controversies between us are more than needed and important. We cannot have the same agreement, the same position to Russia. We need a respectful discussion about how we can develop the context and what we should do. And different approaches are more than welcome. The situation is much too dangerous that we can agree in everything. So that's, for me, very, very important. And I'm very much in favor of Ingeborg's idea to have such as a Nordic conference to Russia, where we discuss much deeper the situation, including the question of the economic interests. The economic interests of Russia, the economic interests of the Western countries, the economic interests of the United States after 1991, when they try to buy everything. These are really very important points. I would only recognize one point. Always have in mind that the economic power of Russia is the same power like Italy or Spain. It's not really a big economic power in the world. So we have also to see this, and these military development of the industry weakened many parts of the Russian industry. I could not explain this deeper, but when you go to Russia, you can see it, that it creates inflation, that it creates problems, only to focus on the militarization of the industry in the country. The buying of houses reduced, there's no money for modernizing the healthcare system, the science system, and. These are huge problems which are creating this war economy. So, but this is only one point. The second point I would like to mention is, and I forgot to say this, but it was also in some of the questions. There's a question which also our politicians always raise. Russia is isolated in the world. And I asked the question, my Russian friends, and they were saying, after they make a little bit of research, in the last year, 2025, 152 presidents or foreign ministers from different countries were coming to Russia. Ingeborg knows it better than me, but I think in the United Nations we have 193 or 94 countries. When you now count who are the NATO countries, which are not going, the rest of the world were traveling to Moscow on a high political level. This is an answer to this isolation, and I will not speak about the role of Russia in BRICS. I can only afford to you read the document of the last Kazan meeting. It's a very interesting document where they put together all their common points which we want to realize. It is really impressive what is these developments. So this for the isolation. The next point, culture. Yes. This is a very important point. For both, in Germany, it is quite impossible to buy books about Russian authors because they ban it. Yeah, there is not an official that you could not buy it, but there is an unofficial, it is literature from the enemy. So be careful. And when you go to the big bookshops, somewhere in the corner you can find a Russian book. But in the past, it was in the middle point. The traditional old, but also the new Russian authors. There are a lot of very famous new Russian authors, Bulgakov and. But now it is quite away. So I'm absolutely in favor of this. And I would like to add one more very important point for new context. This is science. I think it is one of the most stupid decisions of the European Union to stop all the relations to Russian scientists and Russian scientific community. You know, in Germany, we had a Max Planck Institute in St. Petersburg, which was quite famous. They had 9,000 students and 900 were making their doctorate degree. They stopped it. And the students were kicked out in 22. They could not finish their education. What is this for a behavior? And so to redevelop this is a very, very important point, because I have not to tell you, science is international. Last point I would like to mention is the ongoing discussion between us. I hope that next time when we meet, we can exchange first common experience of events and meetings, because we have to learn from each other. And we have to exchange these experiences. So it is very important that we are going forward with concrete next step of arranging contacts.
Thank you. Okay.